Hey there, and happy Thursday. Welcome back to Echoes from the Source. We're on episode 4 now.
Oh, wow. Time
I know,
flies.
right? It's wild. So, in Gurudev's book, An Intimate Note to a Sincere Seeker, there's this chapter, and it really got me thinking about desire and joy.
Oh, yeah. That's such a universal thing, isn't it? It's like we're all
Yeah,
grappling with that.
let's tell me.
Always thinking, if I just get this or, do that, then I'll be happy. It's such a common feeling.
Yes, totally.
Hmm.
And that's actually perfect because in this deep dive, we're going to be looking at two different pieces.
Okay.
And they both kind of touch on this idea of desire and joy.
Mm.
One is called Desire and Joy, the illusion of tomorrow's happiness.
Okay.
And the other one is the illusion of desire, finding joy in the present moment.
I like that.
Yeah.
Right there. The titles almost give it away, don't they?
Yeah, they really set the stage for the whole discussion, don't they?
Yeah.
So the big question we're going to try to answer is, do our desires really lead us to happiness? Or are they, in a way, preventing us from experiencing that true joy that's available right here and now?
It's almost like they're pulling us away from it. Always focusing on what's next, what we're lacking.
Yeah, exactly. It's like constantly reaching for something that's just out of reach.
Right. And both these articles that we're diving into, they both talk about how we always kind of fall into this trap
Hmm.
of thinking that happiness is somewhere off in the future.
Like it's a destination, not a state of being.
Exactly. Like we always say, oh, once I get this new car or, once I get that promotion, then I'll finally be happy.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. It's like we're always on a treadmill, always striving for that next milestone.
Yes. And one of the pieces, it uses this analogy of a mountain climber, always looking for the next peak, the next challenge to conquer.
Oh, that's a good one.
So they reach the summit, and for a moment,
They're happy.
yeah, they feel accomplished,
Right.
but then almost immediately they're already looking for a higher peak to climb.
It never ends, does it?
It's like that satisfaction is so fleeting, and then it's on to the next thing. It makes you wonder, can we actually ever find lasting happiness? Like, is it even possible to achieve that through, external things?
Right. Like, can any achievement, any possession truly bring us that deep, lasting contentment?
That's a big question, isn't it?
It is. And one of the articles, it tells this really fascinating story about an art collector.
Okay.
This guy, he dedicated his whole life to building this incredible collection of paintings. And he was convinced that if he could just get his hands on this one specific masterpiece, like this super rare Van Gogh landscape,
Oh, wow.
he thought, once I have that, I'll finally be content.
So did he get it? Did he finally find that contentment he was longing for?
Well, that's the interesting part. He did eventually acquire the painting. I mean, after years of searching and, spending a fortune.
But what? There's a but there. I can sense it.
But he still felt empty. Like that initial thrill of finally owning the painting, it faded so quickly. And then it was like he was back to square one, already wanting, desiring the next rare piece.
Wow. So even with this incredible achievement, this thing he'd worked towards for so long, it still wasn't enough.
Not at all. It just goes to show how that satisfaction from external things can be so temporary.
Yeah. Like we think it's going to fill this void, but then it doesn't. And it leaves us wanting more.
It's almost like a never-ending cycle, isn't it? We achieve one thing and then we're immediately on to the next. It really makes you think about the nature of desire itself.
It does. And it makes me wonder, have you ever experienced that?
Yeah.
Chasing after something you really wanted, and then when you finally got it, it just wasn't what you expected.
Oh, absolutely. I think we all have, haven't we? It's like we build it up in our minds and then reality just doesn't quite measure up. Or the happiness is so fleeting, it's gone before we can even fully savor it.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting, Because what if the real key isn't about chasing desires at all? What if it's about finding a different way to approach joy, to find it in a way that's not dependent on all these external things?
That's a really powerful thought.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something Gurudev says in his book about how, children,
Yeah.
they just naturally find joy in the simplest things.
Yeah.
Right? Like a ladybug on a leaf or, puddle to jump in. They're fully present in the experience itself. It's amazing.
It is. It's like they haven't learned yet to tie their happiness to all these external achievements and possessions.
Yeah, exactly. We seem to lose that ability as we get older, don't we? Like somewhere along the way, we start believing that happiness is something we need to earn, something we need to achieve.
It's like we forget that it's already within us, this capacity for joy. And instead, we get caught up in this idea that happiness is always somewhere else, something we need to strive for. It creates this barrier, between us and actually experiencing it.
Right. And that's where the concept of Maya comes in, isn't it? I know one of the articles talked about this Sanskrit term.
Yes, Maya. It's a fascinating concept. Basically, it refers to illusion. And in this context, it's about recognizing how our desires, they can create this illusion that happiness is external, always just out of reach.
Like we're chasing a mirage in the desert.
Exactly. We think we're getting closer, but it always remains elusive. And the more we chase, the more elusive it becomes.
So what if we stop chasing altogether? What if we could just let go of that constant striving and realize that true joy isn't about the pursuit, but about something else entirely?
It's a radical idea, isn't it? But what if it's true? What if the key to happiness is actually about letting go?
It's a lot to ponder, for sure.
Hmm.
But how do we even begin to shift our mindset? I mean, how do we move from being so desire-driven to actually finding that contentment in the present moment?
It's a journey, isn't it? It's not about suppressing desires altogether. We're human, after all. It's more about transforming our relationship with them.
Okay, I like that. Transforming our relationship with desire. So what does that look like? How do we actually do that?
Well, one thing that both articles touched on was this idea of gratitude. It's about making a conscious effort to shift our focus from what we lack to appreciating what we already have.
Okay, so instead of dwelling on what we don't have, we start noticing and acknowledging the good things that are already present in our lives.
Exactly. And it can be such simple things, like savoring that first cup of coffee in the morning, appreciating the sound of birds singing outside our window, feeling grateful for the love and support of our friends and family.
It sounds so simple, yet so powerful. It's like we're actively choosing to focus on the positive aspects of our experience rather than getting bogged down by the negative.
That's it. It's a practice. But the more we do it, the more natural it becomes. And it can really make a difference in our overall outlook. It's about bridging that gap, right? Between knowing it in our heads and actually feeling it.
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing to understand these concepts intellectually,
Mm.
but actually living them, that's the real challenge,
It is, totally. So how do we
right?
do that?
How do we go from thinking about it to actually putting it into practice in our daily lives? What are the actionable steps we can take?
Well, both of these pieces, they talk a lot about cultivating this present moment awareness, really being here now.
Okay.
And they talk about mindfulness, which is training our minds to just be present in this moment without judgment.
Okay, so it's not about emptying our minds completely.
No, not at all. It's more about noticing when our thoughts are kind of pulling us away
Hmm.
to the past or the future, and then gently guiding our attention back to right here, right now. What are the sensations in my body? What can I see, hear, smell, taste? What's the feeling of my breath? Just simple things like that.
Yeah, makes sense. It's like we're not trying to stop thoughts altogether, but rather becoming more aware of them
Yeah.
and then choosing where we want to focus our attention.
And
I've tried, mindfulness meditation before.
Yeah.
And it is amazing how much calmer you can feel when you just quiet those racing thoughts.
It's true.
But it's definitely a practice. It doesn't come easy.
It's not about forcing our minds to be blank. It's more about noticing when we've wandered off and then gently bringing ourselves back.
Right, right. And I think one of the articles mentioned something about acceptance too.
Yes. Acceptance is huge. It's about embracing ourselves and our lives just as they are in this moment.
Mhm.
Even if, things aren't exactly perfect or how we wish they were.
Okay, so does that mean we shouldn't try to grow or set goals for ourselves?
No, not at all. It's not about becoming complacent. It's more about shifting our perspective so that we're coming at those goals from a place of inner peace
Mm.
rather than from a place of lack or desperation. Recognizing that our worthiness, it's not dependent on achieving certain things.
Right, right. So it's okay to have ambitions, but we're not attaching our happiness to the outcome.
Exactly. It's about enjoying the journey, finding contentment in the process, rather than making it conditional on reaching some specific destination.
I love that. And this actually reminds me of some of the wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita that you mentioned
Oh,
earlier.
yeah. What about it?
Well, I remember reading about this idea of performing actions without attachment to the results.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. It's about putting our best effort into everything we do, but then surrendering the outcome, letting go of that need to control everything.
It's like trusting that things will unfold as they're meant to, even if it's not exactly how we envisioned it.
Exactly. It's a very powerful practice.
It reminds me of that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
I love that. And that actually ties in really well with Buddha's teachings on tanha, which is the Pali word for craving or desire. He saw this clinging to desires as like the root of suffering.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you break that down a bit more for me? I think for a lot of
Right.
people, the idea of like letting go of desire altogether can seem a little, I don't know, extreme.
Yeah, it's not about like getting rid of all desires. We're human, we're going to have desires.
Right.
It's more about understanding the nature of desire and how when we become overly attached to them, it can lead to suffering.
Okay, so it's like if we're constantly clinging to these desires and they don't get fulfilled, we suffer.
Right. And then even when they do get fulfilled, often that satisfaction is so fleeting. It's like we're always left wanting more.
It's like that art collector we were talking about.
Exactly.
Even when he finally got that painting, it didn't bring him that lasting happiness he had hoped for.
Right, because the happiness wasn't coming from the painting itself. It was coming from this idea he had in his mind about what that painting represented.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the alternative? If we're not supposed to be chasing after desires, then what are we supposed to be doing?
Well, Buddhist teachings, they point to this path of liberation. Okay.
And it involves recognizing like the impermanent nature of desire
Mm-hmm.
and cultivating a sense of detachment from them.
Okay.
It's about finding a deeper kind of peace and fulfillment that's not dependent on external circumstances or the achievement of specific desires.
That's a beautiful idea, but honestly, it can feel kind of overwhelming, Like in our everyday lives, we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us we need more, we need to achieve more.
It's true, we live in a culture that thrives on desire. It's everywhere we look. But, the more we become aware of those messages
Yeah.
and the illusion they're creating, the more we can start to shift our perspective. It starts with remembering that happiness, that true joy, it's not something we find outside ourselves.
Right.
It's something we cultivate within.
So it's not about changing our external circumstances as much as it is about changing our internal state of being.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that joy, it's not something we need to chase after. It's something that's available to us right here, right now. I like that. And I think one of the articles actually asked this really thought-provoking question.
What was it?
It said, if you could find peace and contentment in this very moment, how would your life change?
That's a powerful question. It really makes you pause and reflect, doesn't it? Like, if we could truly find that peace and contentment right now, wouldn't that just shift everything?
It would. You'd be like approaching life from this totally different perspective, Not from a place of lack or striving,
Mm-hmm.
but from a place of already feeling whole and complete.
Imagine that.
It'd be incredible.
Hmm.
But how do we get there? How do we actually cultivate that sense of inner peace and contentment in like the midst of our busy lives?
I mean, it's not always easy, right?
It's not always easy, no. But thankfully, both of these articles, they actually offer some really practical tips, things we can start doing today.
Oh, good. Okay, give it to me straight. What are the actionable steps?
Okay, well, one of the simplest, but also one of the most powerful things is like keeping a gratitude journal.
It's all about like shifting our focus from what we're lacking to what we already have,
Right.
Just taking a few minutes every day to write down things we're grateful for. It can make a huge difference.
I've heard about gratitude journals before, but I've always been kind of skeptical. It seems almost too simple, like, does it really work?
It really can. And it doesn't have to be like anything super profound or complicated. It could be just like being grateful for, I don't know, a warm bed, a delicious meal,
Mm.
the sunshine, even just a friendly smile from a stranger.
Okay, yeah. It's more about like training our minds to focus on the positive
Yeah,
instead of dwelling on all the negative.
exactly. And another thing that both articles talked about was like nurturing those meaningful connections.
Okay, yeah. Friends, family.
Yeah, spending time with loved ones, laughing, sharing stories, all that good stuff.
It's so important. It's easy to forget sometimes,
It is.
We get so caught up in like the busyness of life,
Yeah.
and we put those connections on the back burner.
Yeah, we think, oh, I'll call them next week or, we'll get together soon. And then life happens.
Exactly. And before we know it, weeks have gone by. But taking that time to really connect, it's so essential.
It is. It reminds us that we're not alone. We're part of something bigger.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be some big elaborate thing either. It could just be like having coffee with a friend or even just sending a quick text.
Totally. Just a little gesture can go a long way.
It's the thought that counts. And oh, speaking of things that count, both of the pieces we read, they also talked about making time for things that bring us joy,
Oh, yes. That's huge.
like hobbies, activities,
Yeah.
things that light us up.
Yeah, like reading, gardening, dancing, whatever. Whatever makes you feel alive.
And that actually reminds me of something Gurudev says in his book about, the importance of finding and expressing our talents.
Oh, yeah.
He says, like, when we're engaged in something we love, we naturally tap into this state of flow and joy.
It's so true. And it doesn't have to be something, big or impressive.
Right.
It could be anything. Baking a cake, playing a board game, going for a walk in nature. The important thing is that it brings you pleasure.
It makes you feel good. Oh, and don't forget about, like, the simple pleasures, too.
Yes, those are important.
Like a warm bath, a cup of tea, watching the sunset. These little things can bring so much joy.
Absolutely. It's about appreciating the beauty that's already all around us.
It really is. And, so much of what we've been talking about today, it really comes back to that idea of mindfulness, doesn't it? Like really being present in whatever we're doing, whether it's enjoying a cup of tea or spending time with loved ones.
It does. It's all connected. And one of the articles, it had this great tip
Oh, yeah.
for bringing mindfulness into our daily routine. They suggested bringing awareness to those everyday tasks, the things we usually do on autopilot.
Oh, I see. Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, well, think about washing the dishes or brushing your teeth, folding laundry, even just waiting in line at the grocery store. Like instead of letting our minds wander all over the place, what if we just focused on the sensations of that moment?
Hmm. Yeah, it's like we can turn those mundane tasks into mini meditations.
Exactly. And one last thing that both sources talked about, which I think is really important, is being kind to ourselves. We all have days when we feel down or discouraged or just, off. And we might slip back into old patterns.
Yeah, for
And that's okay. It's part of the process. The important thing is to approach ourselves with compassion.
Yeah, it's easy to like beat ourselves up when we don't meet our own expectations. But, like you said before, it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And when we stumble, the key is to just, acknowledge our feelings,
Mm.
offer ourselves some kindness, and gently redirect our attention back to the present moment.
That's such good advice. As we're wrapping up this deep dive, I'm really struck by how interconnected all of these practices are.
Mm.
Gratitude, connection, joyful activities, mindfulness, self-compassion. It's like they all work together to create this beautiful tapestry of contentment.
They do. And as we cultivate these practices, I think what happens is we start to shift our relationship with desire. We realize that true happiness, it's not something we have to chase. It's something that emerges naturally when we're present and connected and grateful for all the good that's already in our lives.
I love that. It's like we're uncovering this wellspring of joy that's always been within us, just waiting to be tapped into. So, to our listener out there, we'll leave you with this final thought. What if you already have everything you need to be happy right now? Just take a moment to consider that. What if the peace, the joy, the contentment you're seeking is already within your reach? It has been such a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and tools for finding more joy and contentment in your own life. Thanks for joining us on Echoes from the Source, and we'll see you next time.